And this goes to another term, cultural imperialism. This is the domination of one's culture by another culture. So anytime someone's culture comes in and now takes over another culture, that's cultural imperialism. And we see this in multiple forms. Think about a large business, a large company, like a Walmart. If they were to buy up a smaller grocery store, they wouldn't allow that small grocery store to keep its own identity. After all, after a while, that small grocery store would take on the identity, the cultural identity of Walmart. So it's not simply we want to buy you out to help you along. No, we want to gobble you up. And so cultural imperialism also puts out the type of media where one group begins to reign over another group. It sends out those type of messages that the majority should have power over the minority. And after a while, the minority begins to look like the majority in some aspects, but without any of the advantages. And so think about when we spread the gospel, we should be desiring to see people created in the image of Christ, recreated in the image of Christ. But we often have people recreated in our own image. So when missionaries from America would go to the Caribbean or African countries, and then decades later you see the churches in those places, and the churches look like the churches here in America. They're singing American songs, they're doing American prayers and dances. And I'm like, well, where's the cultural and the ethnic heritage being displayed in those African and Caribbean churches? Well, that's part of what cultural imperialism does. We don't just convert, we also have people imitate. We try to duplicate. And so now you have less cultural diversity because now we're recreating people in our cultural image. And then finally you have homogenization, which is simply when you decrease cultural diversity and you normally increase a lack of cultural diversity. You have a monolithic, you have something becomes monocultural. And this is, once again, sometimes intentional and overt. I think sometimes it's unintentional, subtle. It's just something that we do. So imagine if if someone who's very strong-willed puts together a team of individuals who bring a diversity and richness to the team. But over time, because that person is so strong-willed and so resolute in the way that they do things and the way they think about things, that after a while they begin to recreate the team to look like them. So whereas the team at first brought diversity of thought and diversity in terms of expression, years later everyone's talking like the leader. Years later everyone's thinking like the leader. And they become homogenized. Now, they may still have gender diversity. They may still have some ethnic and racial diversity, but they no longer have diversity of thought. And so don't just think of diversity in terms of balance between men and women, balance between ethnic diversity. Because say if it looks very ethnic diverse, but if everyone thinks the same way, it's still homogenized to a certain extent. And so true diversity allows those individuals to come in and continue to thrive as individuals, to bring what they bring to the table. And so that's one of my pet peeves whenever I'm brought in somewhere and they begin to then put all these parameters and all these suggestions, and after a while they want me to be someone I'm not. And I'm like, well, you could have hired that individual. You should have contracted that individual. If you wanted someone to speak like that, you could have had that keynote speaker come. But if you invited me to speak, allow me to speak the way I speak. But when you begin to shape and mold, all of a sudden now that which was culturally diverse becomes homogenized. All right? And now I'm going to conclude by talking about some theories. Those who have taken me in class know that eventually in every class I'm going to introduce some theories. Theory is one of my favorite classes to teach. And I think theories are so important because once again, they allow us to have a better understanding of how we interpret. And so think about when we talk about attributions, how we explain someone's behavior. Well, that's all theories help you do. Theories help you explain and interpret. So you see something, you experience something, and theories give you the framework to interpret that, to explain what's going on. So here are some notable theories in terms of the media and the media's influence on culture. One is the uses and gratifications theory. This theory assumes that the audience, that the reason why they are tuning into the media, the reason why they're consuming the media and engaged in the media in the first place, is because they have certain gratifications that they want to see met. That rarely are we consuming media just to consume it. We're trying to be gratified. We're trying to be built up. We're trying to, even if it's to relax, that's still, we want that gratification. So we use media to be gratified. And so those who produce media, if they know that we're using media to be gratified, what they're going to do is they're going to strategically produce the type of media they think gratifies us. And so they're going to put out stuff that we should make us feel good about ourselves, even if those things aren't always honest or true or accurate. Or they may also put out the stuff that gratifies themselves at the expense of others. So what makes them look good, even if it makes others look bad. And we often can see that in the media. Like you'll see a movie or a television show and you'd be like, man, I don't know how I feel about that. That kind of portrayed me and people like me in a negative light. Well, every time you say that, just know that there's someone who watched that same thing who's feeling good about themselves because they were gratified by that because they were the ones who were being portrayed in a positive light. So all uses and gratification says is that we normally use and engage in media to be gratified. So those who are the gatekeepers, those who have the political economy, those who are in the cultural industries, they're going to know that and they're going to produce media with that in mind. Next, you have the cultivation theory. This deals with how television is used to distribute and consolidate beliefs to the masses. In other words, there was some studies done back in the days that if you really want the masses to think a certain way, to believe certain things, use television. We're talking about at the advent of television. So when they went from radio to television, everyone was always around the television. Ironically, decades later, we're still always around the television or around our laptops viewing media content. And so they thought that if we really wanted to influence people, we couldn't put it in the books. We couldn't just have the pastors preach a sermon about it. We got to put it on television because television was becoming the main teacher. It was becoming the main influencer. So whenever you want to influence the ideas and thoughts of people, put it in the media, put it in the television, put it on the news reports, put it in the TV shows. That way now, especially with this 24-hour news cycle, you see it all day and you begin to think of certain things. So think about this COVID-19. Every news report, everything we see online is saying these messages. It's shaping how we see this particular circumstance. It's invoking fear with some people because all you see every day is COVID, 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 COVID. And all these things about COVID and all is just consuming us. So sometimes we need to just detach, disconnect. That way we don't get cultivated. We don't get, and when you cultivate something, you bring it along, you help it grow it, you help fortify, you help build it up. And so our thought processes, our ideologies, our ideas, our belief systems are being cultivated by the media. Not by our family members, not by the word of God per se, but by what we're bombarded by all the time. Which is why as believers, sometimes we got to know when to disconnect, pray, get in God's word fast. That way we're not being cultivated by the media, but instead we're being cultivated by God's Spirit and God's Word. Another theory is called the agenda setting theory. The agenda setting theory. And this simply suggests that the media has the ability to determine what news gets coverage, what news is seen as important. So think about this. The news cycle, as well as movies and television, those things are timely. They take time. They're costly. It costs money to put that stuff out. So who determines what gets put out? And you would think that in the news, well, the news should be determined by what's the news. Well, think about how many people die a day. Think about how many people are harmed throughout the day. Well, we don't see every news report of every person who dies or every news report of every person who's harmed. Someone has to select which stories get precedent, which stories get coverage. And it's simply saying that oftentimes there is an agenda, and not necessarily meaning this malicious agenda, but there is an agenda that gets pushed forth when someone selects and chooses not to select certain things that get covered. And so keep that in mind, that what we're often seeing on the news, what we're often seeing in the media is by design. And we're not saying it's good or bad. We're just saying that that's the reality, that there's an agenda that's being set by those who have the power to set the agenda. And then the last two theories, one very similar to agenda setting theory is framing theory. And this suggests that the way that the media portrays the media that they put out, whether it's the news report or how the director or the producer frames the film in terms of the story that they tell, that has an impact on how the consumer views that thing. So the person who does a movie about women can frame the narrative around women to where people see women in one light, or they'll see women in another light, positive or negative. The way someone puts out the news report or the song or the television show about black people, they can frame the narrative. They can shape what is said about black people, which will in turn influence how people interpret black people. So rarely is it simply someone putting out, taking reality, and then reporting that reality verbatim. Rarely does a movie take reality and report that verbatim. Even movies about historical accounts will often spice up the historical account. They'll make it, they'll embellish it, they'll make it more action. And so say if the historical account was a person ran into a house and saved 2 people, in the movie version, they saved 5 people. The gist of it is still there, but they embellish to make it more sellable, to make it more marketable. What simply is being done is framing. There's a reality, and those who have the power may not think that that reality can be consumed as is, so they have the power to frame that reality to make it more palatable, to make it more sellable, to make it more marketable, to make it fit the agenda. There's lots of reasons why we frame what we frame, but rarely what happens is that the true story gets put out there unedited. It's most often edited. Certain things are removed. Certain things are put on it. It's photoshopped. Certain things are added to make it look a certain way, and that often inevitably will change how the viewer, the consumer, sees that story. That's framing theory. And then lastly is this theory called the mean world syndrome. And it simply says that when viewers are consumed with negative images, violent images, disparaging images, and words about certain people groups, they will undoubtedly begin to negatively view those people groups. So if all the movies, mainstream movies about a particular race, always paints that race as being the good guys or the powerful ones, people see them in a positive light. But there's a movie about race, and a certain race is always viewed as negative, violent, and marginalized, and things of that nature. People will eventually begin to see them like that, or a certain gender, or a certain religion. So think about all the movies that were coming out every time America's at war with someone. So during the Cold War with Russia and things of that nature, you would have like a Rocky Four and Rocky versus Drago, America versus Russia. Most of us have never been to Russia before in our lives, but after that movie, we had a certain view of Russians. That they were all cold and they want to come over and kill us. And Rocky went over to Russia and beat the Russian. So the mean world syndrome simply says that if we continue to allow ourselves to consume media that portrays certain people groups in negative light all the time, we're going to eventually see them that way. And when we begin to interact with them in real life, we can't be surprised when we view them a certain way. And those things, those negative preconceived notions come out in our behavior, in our interactions. So we should just be careful in how we consume media, which would be my closing thought. If we truly do believe that media has this influence, and media does have this influence over what we see on the news, the movies, the television shows, the video games, the type of music, I'm not saying to simply stop consuming all this stuff. But what I am saying is, let's be more critical consumers. Let's be mindful of what we're consuming, knowing that you are what you eat. We are what we eat. When we eat this media all the time, we become that, and it shapes who we are. So let's be more mindful in how we interact with the media, and to be cognizant of the fact that the media does have a lot of influence over how we see culture. All right? So I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's a little bit longer than, it's about 39 minutes. So it's a full lecture. Normally this would have been over a Monday and Wednesday in class, but this is a full 2-day class lecture. And so based upon this, I want you to head over to the discussion board and answer the question that's down there. And as a reminder, this is on the announcement, I also want you to email me your questions, your comments, and your articles and videos in terms of ways in which you've seen the media influence how we see culture. Movies, television shows, the news outlets, what we read, what we report. You can even tie it into what some of the stuff that's coming out in terms of COVID-19. But I want you to really grasp that fact that media does influence how we see culture in so many different ways. All right? Take care. God bless.